Mom, Mom, look at me. Please, son, just keep walking. 12 years and you're sleeping on a bench. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Who did this to you? Daniel, please. Some doors are better left closed. Daniel Carter had spent 12 years building a fortune across 3 continents, but nothing he had ever earned prepared him for the woman he found shivering beneath a flickering fluorescent light at the Greyhound terminal on West Harrison Street. She wore 2 sweaters over a thin house dress. Her shoes were the same brown loafers she had worn to his college graduation, and tucked under her arm like something precious was a folded grocery bag containing what looked like every belonging she had left in the world. The homeless woman at the bus station was his mother. Welcome to today's story. If powerful, emotional dramas with shocking twists move you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so the next one finds its way to you. And before we go deeper, leave a comment telling me what country you're watching from tonight. It matters more than you know. 8 hours earlier, Daniel had walked out of O'Hare International Airport feeling like a man who had finally earned the right to come home. The Chicago wind hit him the moment the sliding doors parted, sharp and familiar, carrying the smell of jet fuel and roasted nuts from a kiosk near the curb. He pulled his coat tighter and smiled for the first time in what felt like months. He was 41 now. The boy who had left this city carrying one duffel bag and a scholarship letter had returned with 2 passports, a watch he no longer noticed on his wrist, and a holding company that owned property in 4 countries. His driver, a quiet man named Andre, took his luggage and opened the door of a black sedan parked at the arrivals lane. "Where to, Mr. Carter?" Daniel almost said the address of the condo his fiancée Vanessa had chosen near the river. Almost. Then he shook his head. "Garfield Park, my mother's house." He had not told anyone he was coming. Not Vanessa, who had been managing his mother's care for the past 9 years. Not his assistant. Not even his old friends from the neighborhood. He wanted the surprise to be pure. He wanted to knock on the small wooden door of the house he had bought her, the one with the porch swing he remembered from boyhood, and watch her face when she realized who was standing there. For 12 years, he had told himself the same comforting story. He was the good son. He sent money every month. He had purchased the bungalow outright when his first investment fund closed. He paid the property taxes. He covered the utilities. He wired extra cash every holiday and during every Chicago winter, when Vanessa explained the heating bills always ran higher than expected. Vanessa was practical, organized, the kind of woman who handled receipts in spreadsheets and answered emails within the hour. She had taken his mother to doctor's appointments. She had picked up prescriptions. She had sent him photos of Margaret Carter at Thanksgiving, at Easter, sitting in front of small candle-lit cakes on her birthday. "Your mom is doing just fine, baby," Vanessa would say during their evening video calls, her face perfectly framed against the kitchen wall Daniel knew so well. "She doesn't want to bother you. You know how she is." And Daniel had believed her, the way men believe the things they need to be true so they can keep working without guilt. The sedan moved off the expressway and onto streets Daniel half remembered. Old storefronts had been replaced by chains. Some lots stood empty where corner stores used to be. The further they drove from downtown, the more the buildings shrank. At a stoplight near the bus terminal on West Harrison, Andre slowed behind a city bus discharging passengers. Daniel turned his head toward the terminal entrance, casually at first, the way a man looks at anything moving in a window. And then he stopped breathing. Beneath the harsh white lights on a metal bench just inside the open doors sat an elderly woman pulling the lid off a small styrofoam cup. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. Her shoulders were narrower than he remembered. But the way she tilted her head, the curve of her cheek, the soft gray hair she had always pinned back the same way for church, Daniel knew that woman before his mind could catch up. He knew her. Andre stopped the car. "Sir, we're in the middle of..." "Stop the car. Now." Daniel was already pulling at the door handle before the sedan had fully eased into the loading zone. A bus driver behind them leaned on his horn. Daniel didn't hear it. He stepped onto the curb in a long wool coat that probably cost more than the rent of every apartment on the block, and for a moment he just stood there, staring through the open terminal doors at the woman on the bench. She had not seen him yet. She was carefully tearing a small packet of saltine crackers, the kind you get free from a diner if you ask politely, and dipping one corner into the styrofoam cup. Soup, he realized. She was eating soup with crackers because she could not afford a spoon. The thought hit him like a physical blow, and for several seconds he could not make his legs move. A man pushing a cleaning cart passed her without looking. A teenager glanced at her once, then away. The world moved around Margaret Carter the way water moves around a stone in a river, never stopping, never noticing. Daniel had built a life around being noticed. His mother had built a life around not being a burden, and somehow those two things had brought them here, to the same fluorescent-lit terminal at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. He finally walked through the doors. His shoes echoed against the tile. She still didn't look up. He stopped 2 feet in front of the bench. She was humming softly under her breath, the same hymn she used to sing while folding laundry when he was a boy. "It is well with my soul." His throat closed. "Mama." The word came out broken. She froze with the cracker halfway to her lips. Slowly, very slowly, she raised her eyes. For a moment there was no recognition at all. Just confusion, the kind of confusion that came from being looked at directly after a long time of being invisible. Then her face changed. Her lips parted. The cracker fell from her fingers into the cup. "Daniel." He went down to one knee right there on the dirty terminal floor. The cuff of his expensive trousers soaked up something he did not want to identify. He did not care. He reached for her hands and they were so cold he almost gasped. Her knuckles were swollen. There was a faint bruise on the back of her left wrist, yellow, healing, several days old. "Mama, what are you doing here?" She tried to smile. It was the same smile she used to give him when she came home from a double shift at the nursing home, exhausted to the bone, pretending the day had not crushed her. "I'm just resting, baby. I'm fine." "You're not fine. Mama, please look at me. What happened?" She pulled her hands free of his and folded them in her lap the way she always did when she was about to lie politely. "I had a long day. I missed my bus, that's all." "What bus?" "Mama, the last bus from this terminal left 40 minutes ago. I just walked past the schedule." Her eyes shifted away from him toward the floor. He saw it then, the shame, sitting on her shoulders like a coat she could not take off. It was the worst thing he had ever seen on his mother's face. Worse than the night they buried his father. Worse than the day she told him there was no money for the senior class trip. This was different. This was a woman who had spent a lifetime keeping her dignity intact, and someone had taken it from her piece by piece while her son was out earning a fortune on the other side of the planet. "Where are you living, Mama?" She didn't answer. "Where are you sleeping tonight?" The silence stretched between them. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past. Somewhere down the corridor, a baby was crying. Margaret Carter looked at her son, the boy she had raised on food stamps and prayer, the man who now wore a watch that could feed a family for a year, and her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Daniel," she said quietly, "you weren't supposed to see me like this." He sat down on the bench beside her. He did not care about the cold metal. He did not care about the coat. He put his arm around her thin shoulders, and for the first time in 12 years he felt her flinch at being touched. That flinch told him more than any conversation could have. Someone had taught his mother to be afraid. "Mama," he said, "tell me his name." She closed her eyes. "His name," she whispered. "Daniel, it isn't a him, it's a her." The drive to the hotel was the quietest 40 minutes of Daniel's life. Margaret sat in the back seat of the sedan with her grocery bag clutched against her chest, the way a child holds a stuffed animal in a strange room. She kept staring out the window at streets that had once been hers, streets she had walked to church and to the grocery store, and to the bus stop, where she caught the number 20 to her cleaning job at the hospital. Daniel watched her in the reflection of the glass and tried to think of what to say. Every question he wanted to ask felt like a knife he might accidentally turn on her. Andre, to his credit, said nothing. He simply drove. The hotel was on Michigan Avenue, the kind of place with marble floors and a doorman in a green coat who pretended not to notice that the elderly woman walking beside Daniel was wearing 2 sweaters over a house dress and shoes with cracked soles. Daniel saw the doorman's eyes flicker, just for a second, and he felt something hot and ugly rise in his chest. He wanted to grab the man by the lapel and explain that this woman had worked 3 jobs at once so her son could go to a school where boys like the Dorman's son went. He didn't. He simply pressed a hand gently against his mother's lower back and guided her toward the elevators. The suite he had booked overlooked the lake. When they walked in, Margaret stopped at the threshold the way a person stops at the edge of water they're not sure they're allowed to enter. "Daniel, this is too much. It's a hotel room, Mama. It's bigger than the apartment I raised you in." He didn't have an answer for that, so he just took the grocery bag from her hands and set it carefully on the dresser. She watched him do it with an expression he could not read. "I'm going to run you a bath," he said. "There's a robe on the back of the bathroom door. I'll order food while you're in there. Anything you want." She nodded slowly. "Soup would be nice, real soup. You'll have it." While she was in the bathroom, Daniel sat on the edge of the king-sized bed and put his face in his hands. He could hear the water running. He could hear her humming again, softly, the same hymn from the terminal. "It is well with my soul." The sound of it made something tear open inside him. He thought about the photos Vanessa had sent. His mother in front of birthday candles. His mother on the porch swing. His mother at Thanksgiving holding a turkey she had supposedly cooked. Where had those photos been taken? Whose porch swing? Whose kitchen? Whose Thanksgiving? He picked up his phone. He almost called Vanessa right then. He stopped himself. 12 years in business had taught him one thing above all others. When you suspect someone has been lying to you, you do not warn them. You let them keep talking until they have built a tall enough rope. He ordered chicken noodle soup, fresh bread, a side of mashed potatoes, and a slice of pecan pie because it had been her favorite when he was a boy. While he was on the phone with room service, he heard her in the bathroom, and what she was doing made him press the phone hard against his ear so he would not lose composure in front of a stranger. She was crying, quietly, the way a woman cries when she has been crying alone for a very long time and has finally found a place where the sound will be absorbed by tile. He waited until she came out, wrapped in the white robe, her gray hair damp and combed back. She looked smaller without the sweaters. He could see her collarbones. He could see the way her wrist bones pressed against the skin. His mother had lost weight, and not the kind of weight a doctor recommends. She had lost the kind of weight that comes from skipping meals so other people can eat. "Sit down, Mama. Food is coming." She sat at the small table by the window. The lights of the city spread out beyond her like a circuit board. "Daniel." "Yes, Mama. I need to tell you something before the food comes, before you start asking questions, because once I start, I don't think I'll be able to stop." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. The lake outside was black and endless. "I'm listening." She took a slow breath. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, the knuckles still swollen, the bruise still yellow on her wrist. "It started about 3 years after you left." 3 years after you left," Margaret repeated almost to herself. "Vanessa came to see me by herself. You were in Singapore then, or maybe it was Dubai. I can never keep them straight." "Dubai," Daniel said quietly. "That was Dubai," she nodded. "She came over on a Saturday morning. Brought me a coffee cake from that bakery on Madison. Sat at my kitchen table and told me she wanted to start helping. Said you were working yourself sick and she didn't want to bother you with little things, with bills and paperwork and doctor's appointments. She said, 'Mama Carter, let me carry some of this for you,' and I said yes." Daniel felt something tighten in his stomach. He kept his face still. "She was good to me at first. I want you to hear that. She was good to me. She took me to my eye doctor when my cataracts started getting bad. She brought groceries when the snow was too high for me to walk to the store. She set up that little tablet so we could have our calls. Daniel, I didn't have any reason not to trust her. She was going to be my daughter-in-law." "What changed, Mama?" She didn't answer right away. There was a knock at the door and Daniel rose to receive the food. He tipped the room service attendant too much, the way a man does when he's trying to apologize to the universe for something that isn't really his fault. He wheeled the carton himself. He set the soup in front of his mother and sat down across from her again. She lifted the spoon. Her hand was trembling. She set the spoon down. "It happened slowly," she said. "That's the part nobody understands about these things. It happened so slowly I didn't see it happening. First, it was little things. She started telling me which doctor to use, then which medication to switch to. Then she said the house needed a second mortgage, just a small one, to fix the roof. I never saw a roofer come, Daniel. I didn't even know what a second mortgage was. I just signed where she pointed. Daniel's hands curled into fists under the table. Then one day, about, 5 years ago, she sat me down and said you had asked her to take over the deed, to put it in her name just temporarily for tax reasons. Something about you being a foreign resident. She showed me a letter. It had your signature on it. Mama, I never sent that letter. I know, baby, I know that now, but I didn't know then. The signature looked like yours. He closed his eyes. He had signed thousands of documents in 12 years. Contracts, wire authorizations, board resolutions. Vanessa had handled most of his personal correspondence. She had access to his stationery, his printer, his electronic signature for routine items. He had trusted her with all of it because she was supposed to become his wife. What happened after you signed it? Margaret picked up the spoon again. This time she managed a small sip of broth. She closed her eyes the way people do when they taste something warm after too long without warmth. At first, nothing. Everything was normal. Then about 2 years ago, she came to me and said she needed to sell the house. She said you had bought me a nicer place in a senior community on the south side. She showed me brochures. It looked beautiful, Daniel. Gardens, a chapel, a little library. I cried because I thought my son had done such a sweet thing for me. There was no senior community. No, baby, there was no senior community. She put me in a rooming house on 63rd Street, 4 other women in one apartment. She said it was temporary while the new place was being prepared. After a few months, she stopped coming to visit. After a year, the manager of the rooming house said the rent hadn't been paid in 3 months and I had to leave. Daniel set down his water glass very carefully so that he would not crush it. Why didn't you call me, Mama? I tried. The 2 words landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. I tried, Daniel. I called the number you gave me. A woman answered every time. Sometimes she said you were in a meeting. Sometimes she said you were traveling. Sometimes she said you would call me back. You never did, so eventually I stopped calling. I thought maybe you were busy. I thought maybe you had a new life and I was holding you back from it. Daniel could not speak. His mother was looking at him with those soft, forgiving eyes. I want you to know, she said quietly, I never stopped being proud of you. Not for one single day. Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat in the leather armchair by the window while his mother slept in the king-sized bed for what he suspected was the first time in years. She had eaten half the soup and a small piece of bread. She had refused the pecan pie, saying her stomach was not used to sweetness anymore. That sentence alone had nearly broken him. He had wrapped the slice in a napkin and set it on the nightstand beside her, the way you leave a light on for a child who is afraid of the dark. Now the city glittered below him and his laptop hummed quietly on the desk. He had opened it around midnight. He had not closed it since. The number Margaret said she had called for 12 years was not his cell phone. It was not his office line. It was a forwarding number Vanessa had set up early in their relationship, back when she had offered to be a buffer between his personal life and the demands of his work. I'll handle the family stuff, baby, she had said, smiling over a glass of wine in a restaurant in River North. You focus on the deals. I've got your mother. He pulled up the call logs from the forwarding service. The records went back 9 years. There were 143 calls from a Chicago landline registered to Margaret Carter. Every single one of them had been answered by Vanessa's assistant or rerouted to Vanessa's personal line. Not one had been forwarded to him. Not one. He sat back in the chair and stared at the screen for a long time. Then he opened the bank records. He had wired money to his mother's household account every month for 12 years. $12,000 a month for the last 6 years after his second fund closed. He had increased it to $15,000 during the pandemic, when Vanessa told him his mother's health was fragile and she needed a private nurse. Daniel did the math in his head. Over $1 million in the last 6 years alone. More than $2 million across the full 12. He started clicking through the statements. The household account had been closed 4 years ago. Closed, not transferred. The funds had been moved to a joint account, Carter Ray's Household Management, with Vanessa Ray's as the primary signatory and his mother as a non-active co-holder. Margaret Carter had never set foot in that bank. He was looking at her signature on the opening documents, and even at 3 in the morning, with eyes that had not blinked in an hour, he could see that the signature was wrong. The M was hers. The rest was not. From that joint account, money had been moving out steadily for 4 years. Some of it had gone to Vanessa's personal credit cards. Some had gone to a property management company in Lincoln Park. Some had gone to a leasing company for a black Range Rover he had seen Vanessa drive but never thought to question, because she had told him it was a gift from her father. Her father, who Daniel had met exactly twice, both times briefly, both times at restaurants Vanessa had chosen. He kept scrolling. There were withdrawals from the joint account to a second entity, something called Bright Horizons Family Services LLC. He did not recognize the name. He opened a new browser tab and ran a quick corporate search. Bright Horizons Family Services was registered in Delaware. Its listed officer was Vanessa Ray's. Its registered address was a P.O. box in Wilmington. There was no website. There was no phone number. It existed only on paper, and over the last 3 years, just over $600,000 had flowed through it. He sat very still. He thought about every dinner he had eaten with Vanessa over the last decade, every charity gala she had attended on his arm, every time she had touched his hand across a tablecloth and told him his mother was just fine, that he should not worry, that he had earned the right to focus on his work. He thought about his mother on the bench at the bus station, dipping a saltine into styrofoam soup. He stood up and walked to the window. Chicago at 3 in the morning is a strange city, half asleep, half watching. He pressed his palm against the cold glass and breathed slowly until his hand stopped shaking. Behind him, his mother stirred in her sleep and murmured something. He could not make out the words. He turned and watched her for a moment. The bruise on her wrist was still yellow in the lamplight. Someone had given her that bruise. He had not asked about it yet because he did not trust himself to hear the answer, but the question was coming, and whoever was on the other side of that answer was not going to like what happened next. He sat back down at the laptop. He had one more search to run before the sun came up. The search he ran at 4 in the morning was the one he had been avoiding for the last 2 hours. He typed his mother's name into the public records database his firm subscribed to, the same database his investigators used when they were doing due diligence on a potential acquisition. He had never used it for a personal reason in his life. His hands hesitated above the keyboard for several seconds before he pressed enter. The results loaded. Margaret Louise Carter. Date of birth, May 14, 1955. Last known address, 6219 South Aberdeen Street, Chicago. That was the rooming house she had described. Below it, a list of records that should not have existed. A protective order filed 18 months ago. Petitioner Margaret Louise Carter. Respondent Vanessa Marisol Reyes. Reason for filing: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and physical altercation resulting in injury. Daniel read the line 3 times. The order had been granted on a temporary basis. A full hearing had been scheduled for 6 weeks later. Margaret had not appeared at the hearing. The order had been dismissed for non-appearance. He sat back. His mother had tried. She had walked into a courthouse somewhere in this city alone and filed a piece of paper trying to protect herself. And then somehow, somewhere, something had happened between the temporary order and the full hearing. Something that had stopped her from showing up. He scrolled further. There was a 911 call log from the rooming house on 63rd Street, 22 months ago. The caller had been a neighbor. The complaint listed a verbal altercation and a woman screaming. Officers had responded. No arrest had been made. The reporting officer's narrative noted that the elderly resident was uncooperative and appeared reluctant to give a statement in the presence of a younger female who identified herself as the resident's caretaker. The caretaker had given her name as Vanessa Reyes. Daniel closed the laptop. He went into the bathroom and turned on the cold water and let it run over his wrists for a long time. He looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was the same man who had closed a $140 million deal in Geneva 3 weeks ago over a single cup of espresso. The same man who had stared down a hostile board and walked out with a unanimous vote. He did not recognize his own eyes. He went back into the room. He sat on the edge of the bed beside his mother. She was awake. She had been awake, he realized, for some time. She was just lying very still, the way she used to lie still in the apartment when she did not want him to know she was crying about the rent. "Mama." "Yes, baby. You filed a protective order." The silence stretched. "I did." "What happened the day of the hearing?" She did not answer immediately. She turned her head on the pillow so she could see him. The lamplight was soft on her face, and for a moment she looked almost the way she had looked when he was a boy and she had come to tuck him in after a long shift. "She came to the rooming house the night before," Margaret said. "She brought me a cup of tea. She sat on the bed where I was sleeping and she stroked my hair. She said, 'Mama Carter, you don't want to do this. Think of Daniel. Think of what this will do to him. Think of the reporters. Think of his deals. You go to that courthouse tomorrow and you'll destroy your son's life. You'll be the woman who ruined her own boy. Is that how you want him to remember you?'" Daniel felt something rip behind his ribs. "She said that to you. She said that to me. And I believed her, Daniel. I believed her because I love you, so I didn't go. And the order went away." And 2 weeks later, the rooming house manager said the rent hadn't been paid and I had nowhere to go. "Where did you go that first night, Mama?" She closed her eyes. "I went to the Pacific Garden Mission. Then I went to a shelter on the west side. Then I went to a Salvation Army on the south side. I moved around because I didn't want anyone to know who I was. I was so ashamed, Daniel. I was so ashamed of being a burden." "You were never a burden." "I was a burden to her. She was never family, Mama. She was a thief in a wedding dress." Margaret reached up and touched his cheek with her swollen knuckles. Her hand was warm now. The bath, the soup, the bed, the simple dignity of a room with a door that locked. Already she was coming back to herself. "Daniel," she said softly, "what are you going to do?" He took her hand and held it carefully. "I'm going to make a phone call in the morning, Mama. Then I'm going to bring her here. Here, to this hotel, to this room. I want her to see you. I want her to look at you sitting in this chair, and I want her to understand that the lie is over." His mother studied his face for a long moment. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't do anything that puts you in a cell." "I didn't survive 12 years on a bench to visit my son in a prison." He smiled for the first time since he had walked into the bus terminal. "I promise, Mama, I'm not going to touch her. I have something much worse than that." He let her sleep until 10 in the morning. While she slept, he made 3 phone calls from the small writing desk by the window. The first was to a forensic accountant in New York who had once unwound a fraud scheme that involved 7 shell companies across 4 jurisdictions. Her name was Priya Mahajan, and she answered on the second ring even though it was barely 7 on the East Coast. "Daniel, I haven't heard from you in 2 years. Priya, I need you on a plane to Chicago this afternoon." "What's the matter?" "Someone has been stealing from my mother for 9 years. I have the bank records. I need everything traced and frozen by the end of the week. I need it airtight enough that no judge in this city can wave it away." There was a pause. "Send me what you have. I'll be on the noon flight." The second call was to a lawyer named Curtis Holloway. Curtis had handled 3 of Daniel's acquisitions and had a reputation in Chicago for being the kind of attorney who made opposing counsel call in sick. Daniel explained the situation in clipped sentences. Curtis listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Curtis said only, "Don't speak to her until I'm in the room with you. Not one word, not one text. I'll be at your hotel by noon." The third call was the one Daniel had been preparing himself for all night. He dialed Vanessa. She picked up on the 4th ring. Her voice was warm and sleepy. "Baby, is something wrong? It's so early." "I'm in Chicago." There was a fraction of a second of silence. He listened for it the way a sonar listens for a submarine. He caught it. It was small, but it was there. "You're what? Oh my God, Daniel, why didn't you tell me? When did you land?" "Last night." "Last night, where are you? Are you at the apartment? Why didn't you call me? I wanted to surprise you." "Well, you certainly did." She laughed, that bright, easy laugh he had heard 1,000 times. "Are you at the condo? I'll come right over." "Give me 45 minutes. I'm not at the condo, I'm at the Peninsula, Suite 2406. Another small pause. The Peninsula, why are you at a hotel? I wanted somewhere quiet. I want to see you, Vanessa. There's something I need to talk to you about. Can you be here at 1 o'clock? Of course, baby. Is everything all right? You sound strained. It's been a long flight, 1 o'clock. I'll be there. He hung up. He set the phone face down on the desk. His hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped sometime around 4 in the morning and it had not come back. Margaret was awake when he turned around. She was sitting up against the pillows, the white robe wrapped around her, watching him. You sounded like a stranger on that phone, Daniel. I had to. I don't recognize that voice. I know, Mama, I don't either, but it's the only voice that's going to work today. She nodded slowly, the way she used to nod when he was a boy, and she had decided not to argue with him about something she did not entirely approve of. Curtis Holloway arrived at 11:45. He was tall and silver-haired and wore a suit that looked like it had been pressed twice that morning. He set his briefcase on the coffee table without ceremony and shook Margaret's hand with a gentleness that surprised Daniel. Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Thank you, sir. With your permission, I'd like to record this afternoon's conversation. Illinois requires two-party consent, but since your son is the one being deceived, and since the property and accounts in question belong to you, we have grounds. I'll explain everything in plain language before we begin. Margaret looked at Daniel. It's all right, Mama. He's on our side. Then it's all right. Priya arrived 20 minutes later with a leather portfolio and a small printer. She greeted Margaret with a kind of reverence that took Daniel by surprise. Then she sat at the desk and began laying out documents, bank statements, wire transfer logs, corporate registration forms, the records of the protective order, a printout of the call forwarding service, the closed accounts, the shell company in Delaware, the Range Rover lease, the Lincoln Park property. By 12:30, the small living area of the suite looked like the war room of a federal investigation. Curtis walked around the table once, surveying it. This is more than enough, he said quietly. Far more than enough. Daniel stood by the window watching the street below. At 12:55, a black Range Rover pulled up to the hotel entrance. Vanessa stepped out wearing a cream-colored coat. The doorman in the green uniform held the door open for her. She did not tip him. She looked up at the building for a moment. She could not see Daniel, but Daniel saw her. She's here, he said. Curtis closed the curtain partway, turned to Margaret, and offered his arm. Mrs. Carter, would you do me the honor of allowing me to escort you to the chair by the window? I want you facing the door when she walks in. Margaret stood up slowly. She squared her shoulders the way she used to before a long shift. She walked across the suite on her son's lawyer's arm, and she sat down in the chair facing the door in the white robe with her hands folded in her lap. There was a knock. Daniel opened the door himself. Vanessa stood in the hallway with a small bouquet of white roses in her hand and the same smile she had been giving him for 9 years. She was 36, and she was beautiful in that careful, expensive way that took 2 hours every morning to assemble. Her hair was pulled back. Her earrings were small and tasteful. She held the flowers up between them like a peace offering. Welcome home, baby. She leaned in to kiss him. Daniel turned his head a fraction of a degree so that her lips brushed the corner of his jaw instead of his mouth. She did not appear to notice, or perhaps she did and she had decided in the half-second it took her to cross the threshold not to react. I missed you, she said. Come in. She walked past him into the suite. He watched her shoulders. He watched the precise moment her shoulders stopped. She had seen Margaret. For perhaps 2 full seconds, Vanessa did not move. The bouquet hung at her side. Her face did the thing Daniel had seen on the faces of CEOs across the table from him when they realized he had read the footnotes in their financial disclosures. The face of a person recalculating in real time. The face of a person who had been confident a moment ago and was now hunting for an exit they could not find. Then she smiled. Mama Carter, oh my God, you're here. She started forward, arms half raised, the way a person moves toward a relative they have not seen in a long time. Margaret did not stand up. Margaret did not return the smile. Margaret simply sat in the white robe with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the woman who had told her not to go to the courthouse. Vanessa stopped halfway across the room. She turned to Daniel. Baby, what is this? Why is your mother here? Where did you find her? I've been looking for her for months. I've been worried sick. Have you? Daniel, you don't understand. She wandered off. She has some confusion now. The doctors said, sit down, Vanessa. Daniel, sit down. She sat. She chose the couch, which placed her with her back to the window and her face toward Margaret. Curtis Holloway stepped forward from where he had been standing quietly near the bedroom door. Vanessa noticed him for the first time and her eyes narrowed by the smallest fraction. Who are you? My name is Curtis Holloway. I'm Mr. Carter's attorney. I'd like to inform you that this conversation is being recorded with the knowledge and consent of two of the three parties in the room. You are not required to remain. If you choose to remain, you are choosing to be recorded. Do you understand? Vanessa's expression hardened by a degree that would have been invisible to anyone who did not know her. Daniel, what is going on? You can leave, Daniel said. Curtis just told you that. The door is right there. You're a free woman for now. She stared at him. Then slowly she set the bouquet of white roses on the coffee table. I'll stay. Good. Priya stepped forward and laid a single sheet of paper on the table in front of Vanessa. It was the registration document for Bright Horizons Family Services LLC, Delaware. Vanessa's signature was at the bottom. Do you recognize this document? Vanessa glanced at it. I'd like to call my lawyer before I answer any questions. That's your right, Curtis said. Would you like to leave to do so? I'll call from here. Then we'll wait. She pulled out her phone. Her hand was, Daniel noticed, completely steady. She had done this before. Not this exact thing, but something like it. He could see it in the way she scrolled to a contact she had on speed dial. She was not the kind of woman who needed to look for her lawyer's number. She stepped to the far corner of the suite and spoke quietly into the phone for 2 minutes. When she came back, she sat down again and folded her hands. I'm not going to answer any questions today. Understood, Curtis said. Then I'm going to do the talking. You're going to listen. You can interrupt whenever you like. You can leave whenever you like. But before you do either, you need to understand exactly where you are. He nodded to Priya. Priya began. She walked through it methodically, the way a surgeon walks through a procedure. The closed household account, the joint account with the forged signature, the Delaware Shell Company, the Range Rover, the Lincoln Park property, the $2 million gap between what Daniel had wired and what had reached his mother, the protective order, the 911 call log, the dismissed hearing. For 38 minutes, Vanessa Reyes sat on the couch in her cream-colored coat and listened to the inventory of her own crimes. She did not interrupt once. When Priya finished, the room was completely silent. Curtis turned to Vanessa. By close of business today, every account associated with you and with Bright Horizons Family Services will be frozen under an emergency civil order. By Monday morning, a criminal referral will be on the desk of the Cook County State's Attorney for financial exploitation of an elder, identity theft, wire fraud, and battery against a vulnerable adult. Your engagement to Mr. Carter is, of course, terminated as of this moment. You will return the ring you are wearing before you leave this suite. Vanessa looked down at her left hand, then she looked up at Margaret. For the first time since she had walked into the room, her composure cracked. Not into tears, into something colder. Her lips pulled back from her teeth just slightly. You stupid old woman. Margaret did not flinch. I'm not stupid, baby, Margaret said quietly. I just took a long time to stop being kind to the wrong person. Vanessa pulled the ring off her finger and dropped it on the coffee table. It rolled once and stopped against the base of the white roses. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her coat, and walked out of the suite without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Margaret let out a slow breath, the kind a person releases after holding it for years without realizing. Is it really over, Daniel? The first part is over, Mama. The rest is going to take some time, but yes, she's never coming near you again. Curtis Holloway gathered his papers with quiet efficiency. Priya began packing her portfolio. Daniel walked over to his mother and knelt beside her chair. He took her hand. I want to ask you something, Mama. And I want you to think about it for as long as you need. All right. Where do you want to live? She blinked. The house, baby. I want the house back. That house is going to be tied up in litigation for at least a year. Vanessa transferred the deed to a holding company. Curtis can fight for it. He thinks we'll win, but it could take time. Margaret nodded slowly. Then I'll wait. That house was my home, Daniel. Your father and I painted those walls. You took your first steps in that living room. I want it back. I'll wait however long it takes. Then we'll get it back. That afternoon, Daniel bought a small condo 2 blocks from the lake. He paid cash. He put the deed in his mother's name only. By Friday evening, Margaret Carter was sitting on a small balcony with a cup of real coffee in a real mug, watching sailboats move slowly across the water. She still had the bruise on her wrist. She still flinched when someone moved too quickly behind her. The body remembers things the mind tries to forgive. But she was home in a way she had not been home in years. 3 months passed. Vanessa was arrested on a Tuesday morning at her apartment in Lincoln Park. Daniel did not attend the arraignment. Curtis sent him a single text message that afternoon. No bail, flight risk. She's not going anywhere. Daniel read the message, put the phone face down, and went back to his mother's apartment to watch a baseball game with her on a small television she had picked out herself. The civil case moved faster than the criminal one, the way these cases often do when the documents have already been gathered. Curtis recovered the Garfield Park house by the end of the 4th month. Margaret walked through the front door on a Saturday morning in May. She stood in the living room for a long time without speaking. The walls were the same color her husband had painted them in 1986. The wood floors still creaked in the same 3 places. She sat down on the bottom step of the staircase and she cried the way a person cries when they have come home from a war. Daniel sat down beside her. Mama, I want to ask you to forgive me. For what, baby? For not coming home sooner. For not calling the right number. For trusting her instead of trusting you. Margaret reached over and put her hand against his cheek the way she used to do when he was 8 years old and had brought home a bad report card. Daniel, I forgave you the night you found me at the station. Mama, listen to me. You were a boy who got out of this neighborhood. You worked hard. You sent money. You believed the woman who told you I was fine. That isn't a sin. That's love wearing a blindfold. The sin was hers, not yours. He could not answer her. She pulled his head down against her shoulder and held him there. This woman who weighed barely 110 pounds, holding her grown son the way she had held him when he had skinned his knees on Aberdeen Street 35 years ago. In the months that followed, Daniel restructured his entire business. He moved his primary office from Singapore to Chicago. He hired a chief operating officer to handle the international travel he had been doing himself. He came home every night for dinner with his mother. He learned to cook 3 of her recipes. He drove her to her doctor's appointments. He sat with her at church on Sunday mornings, in the same pew where she had sat with his father, in the same building where she had taught him to read using a hymnal when the public library closed early. One evening in late autumn, they were sitting on the porch swing he remembered from boyhood. The leaves were turning. A neighbor waved from across the street. Margaret had a quilt over her knees. Daniel, yes, Mama, I want to do something with some of the money she didn't get. Anything. She looked out at the street, at the houses where she had known every family for 40 years, at the bus stop on the corner where she had waited 1,000 times to go to work. There's a bus station on West Harrison, she said quietly. I think there are still people sleeping there tonight. Daniel did not say anything for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. Tell me what you want to build, Mama. They called it the Aberdeen House. It opened on a cold Saturday morning in February, on a corner lot 2 blocks from the bus terminal on West Harrison. The building had once been a shuttered union hall. Daniel had bought it for cash in November. By February, it had 40 beds, a clean kitchen, a small chapel for those who wanted one, a quiet library with donated books and 3 full-time social workers on staff. The walls were painted the same pale yellow Margaret had chosen for her own kitchen in 1986. She said it was the color of forgiveness. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony. There were no reporters. Margaret had asked for it that way. The doors simply opened and the first guest, an elderly woman named Doreen who had been sleeping at the Pacific Garden Mission for 6 months, walked through them at 9 in the morning carrying a plastic grocery bag. Margaret met her at the door. Welcome home, baby. Let me take that bag for you. Doreen looked at her for a long moment. Are you the lady who owns this place? I'm a lady who used to sleep where you slept. Come on in. The coffee's hot. Daniel watched from the doorway of the small office he had set up for himself in the back. He had not told Doreen, or any of the guests who came after her, who he was or what he did for a living. He preferred it that way. His mother greeted every new arrival herself for as long as her health allowed it. She remembered every name. She remembered every story. The social workers learned quickly that if they wanted to know what a particular guest needed, the fastest way to find out was to ask Margaret. The criminal trial of Vanessa Reyes concluded in late spring. She was convicted on every count. The judge handed down 9 years in state prison. Daniel did not attend the sentencing. He read about it the next morning in a brief article on page 7 of the Tribune. The article did not mention his name. Curtis had worked hard to keep it that way. Daniel folded the paper, set it on the kitchen table, and poured his mother another cup of coffee. Was that her in the paper? Margaret asked. Yes, Mama. 9 years. Yes, Mama, she nodded slowly. She did not smile. She did not say anything cruel. She simply took a sip of her coffee and looked out at the garden she had started planting along the side of the house. That's a long time to think about what you did, she said finally. It is. I hope she uses it well. That was the only time his mother ever spoke of Vanessa Reyes again. A year after the Aberdeen house opened, it served its 500th guest. By the second year, Daniel had purchased 2 additional buildings, one on the south side and one in Garfield Park. He still ran his investment firm. He still closed deals. But he no longer measured his life in transactions. He measured it in the number of beds that were warm at night, in the number of breakfasts his mother served in the kitchen of a shelter that bore the name of the street he had been born on. On a quiet evening in October, almost 2 years to the day after he had walked into the bus terminal on West Harrison, Daniel sat on the porch swing of the Garfield Park house with his mother. She was 71 now. Her hair was almost entirely white. The bruise on her wrist had healed long ago. The flinch when someone moved too quickly behind her was almost gone. She was holding a cup of tea. He was holding a cup of coffee. The neighbor across the street was raking leaves. Daniel. Yes, Mama. Do you remember what I asked you that first night at the hotel? You asked me to promise I wouldn't put myself in a cell. That's right. Do you remember what you said? I said I had something much worse than that. Margaret smiled. She set her teacup on the small table between them. She reached over and put her hand on his. You did, baby. You let her watch you build something good. You let her sit in a prison cell knowing that the woman she tried to throw away had her name on the door of a shelter that takes in women just like her. That's a punishment no judge could write. It wasn't about punishing her, Mama. I know that. That's why it worked. The light was beginning to fade. Somewhere down the block, a child was calling for her mother to come see something. A dog was barking. A bus was groaning to a stop at the corner, the same number 20 his mother had ridden to the hospital for 30 years. Daniel looked at his mother. She looked smaller than he remembered from his childhood. She also looked larger than any other person he had ever known. Mama, can I ask you something I should have asked you a long time ago? Anything, baby. Are you happy? She did not answer right away. She watched the bus pull away from the curb. She watched the leaves coming down. She squeezed his hand once and then she nodded. I'm home, Daniel. My boy came home. And we built something that means the next mother won't have to sit on that bench. That's not happiness, baby. That's better than happiness. That's peace. They sat together on the porch swing until the streetlights came on. If this story made you think of someone you've been meaning to check on, don't wait. Pick up the phone tonight. Drive over tomorrow. Show up at the door without warning. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who will never tell us they need us. Sometimes the only way to find out is to come home. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this story moved you, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what loved one came to mind while you were listening. Like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next one.